First of all, let me clear the record. Fiona does not fart on the airplane. And I got Fiona because I was an impeachment manager during COVID, and I was stuck in my house in Washington, D.C. The choir members know this because they haven't seen me now for several years. I was stuck in my house, and I thought, you know what they say about Washington, right? If you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. So true. I got a dog, and her name is Fiona, and she's a Westie. And from the time I got her at age 4 months, I trained her to fly on the airplane. So now she just goes in her little crate, and she lies down, and she goes under the seat, and she has a Zen moment until she gets to Denver, and she's fine. So someday I hope you get to meet Fiona, because she really has been a great friend, and she has a job. Her job is policy advisor. And she comes to the office with me every day, and she brings sunshine and happiness to the Capitol. And she also staffed me recently at an important award ceremony by the Humane Society. Her briefing left a little to be desired for that. So anyway, that's the story of Fiona. I'm always happy to come to Montview and talk about my work in Congress. And I'm really happy to come and talk to you about climate today. It's such a beautiful spring day. I don't want to be negative when I talk about the U.S. Congress this morning, even though it would be easy to do. I will give you a quick report before I talk about the climate issues. You saw the shocking air raid yesterday on Israel, so this has caused Speaker Johnson to now jettison the schedule for next week. And the schedule for next week was, I'm not making this up, you can look online, it was several bills repealing energy efficiency standards for appliances. I know that's top in all of your minds. And so he's not bringing those bills up next week. Instead, we hope he'll bring up the aid package that includes Israel, Ukraine, and Asia, and humanitarian aid. That's the bill that passed the Senate with 70 votes. And I have been, to the point Clover was making, for about the last month, I've been whipping votes. That means trying to count votes. But I've been assigned to whip the Republicans by my Democratic leadership. So I've been trying to whip the Republicans for the last month, and I think what you'll see, if we can get this bill to the floor, is an overwhelming number of the members of the House will vote for this, including the aid to Ukraine, including the humanitarian aid. It's just a few people, and you know who they are, who are stopping this. And so we need to get beyond that barrier. We really need to get that aid out. So that's my report from the front from yesterday. Anyway, my topic today is climate, and I was delighted to be asked to speak because there really is a lot going on in Washington, D.C. under the surface. Most of you know I've been in Congress since the same year I joined Montview. I figured I better have a church home if I was going to be in Congress. And I've been on the Energy and Commerce Committee ever since I was elected to Congress in 1996. So some of my portfolio, most of you know about the healthcare work that I do, telecommunications, consumer protection, but also, of course, energy, climate change, and all of the associated issues. I was in Congress in the days when we would have hearings on climate change, and we would have a panel of scientific witnesses, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the Energy and Commerce Committee actually were climate deniers. And it was shocking to me to see how they would willfully ignore the existential threat that we are facing in our country and in our world, and that we really need to lean in and apply ourselves to make sure that we preserve our world for my grandbaby Eva and for future generations. So they would sit there and they would just completely deny that climate change exists. In 2010, I was the vice chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I was also chief deputy whip for the Democrats. And so one of the little chores I had was I was the whip tasked to get the votes together for the Waxman-Markey climate bill, which was really the first big climate bill. It was a cap and trade bill that was designed to address climate change. And working very closely with Nancy Pelosi and the chair of the Energy and Commerce at that time, Henry Waxman, we were able, it was really me and Nancy, were able to come up with 218 votes, which is the bare, as we've learned so well this last year, it's the bare minimum number you need to pass a bill. And then, of course, it went over to the Senate, and as we always say in the House, you know, the Republicans are our opponents, but the Senate is the enemy. And lo, what happened was it went over to the Senate, and then the Senate never took it up. So we've spent the last 15 years, really, since then, trying to rebuild a climate portfolio. And the good news is that because of extreme climate events, because of the mounting evidence that we have of the havoc that climate change is wreaking on our world, there now are very few Republicans or anybody who deny that climate change exists. There are a few people who still say, well, climate change exists, but we don't need laws. We don't need Congress to do anything. The market can control. And in fact, I will say, in the absence of guidance from Congress, the market has controlled to a degree. If you think about it, look at electric vehicles, look at, for example, we're about to end up having most of the gas-fired or the coal-fired plants, the coal-fired energy plants, most of them are going to be closed by 2025. And that's not because of any edict by a governmental agency. It's because of market decisions that have taken control. In addition, many states like Colorado, municipalities like Denver, have taken it upon themselves to address climate change at a local level. And that has had a great deal of success as well in beginning to bend that curve a little bit. But the crisis still exists. And it's my belief, and many people's belief, that we need to have a federal standard. One of the problems you have, and this is true for everybody, but it's really true for industry. Think about if you were Xcel Energy and you were trying to come up with a business plan, and you were doing business in 8 or 10 states. One of the states had very strong climate rules like Colorado does, and other states have no climate rules at all. It's very difficult for everybody to decide what you want to tell your shareholders and the effort that you want to make. So that's why I really think we need a national guidance. And more people, not just from the environmental standpoint, environmental groups, but also from private industry, are beginning to realize that we need to have those climate goals. And as I mentioned, most of my colleagues are beginning to understand that as well. I have a colleague and friend, John Curtis from Utah. He's a Republican. He formed a caucus, and don't laugh, his caucus is called the Conservative Climate Caucus. And I said, and it's a caucus of Republicans who are committed to addressing climate change through legislative mechanisms. So I said to John, you know, why'd you call it the Conservative Climate Caucus? He said, well, I wanted to get higher membership. And in fact, he has a lot. I don't know how many it is now. I think it's around 90 members that he has in the Conservative Climate Caucus. So we still have a lot of disagreements on, and I'll talk about this in a minute, about how we approach climate legislation, how we approach putting putting the constructs that we need in place to get there. But at least there's a recognition now. And as you heard from Clover, I'm now the senior Democrat, I like to say the chair in waiting of the Energy, Climate, and Grid Subcommittee. So we've had a number of hearings on climate issues and related topics. And I've been really pleasantly surprised. I haven't heard one person on the other side of the aisle deny climate change. I haven't heard one person say we don't need to do anything. I mean, we might disagree on what we need to do, but we're getting there. So that's good news. And I will also tell you, last year, as you know, every year they have climate talks internationally where all of the countries around the world get together and talk about how they're going to address climate issues. Last year, the meeting was in Dubai, and we had nearly 200 nations that came together and pledged to transition away from fossil fuels, which would, of course, curb the harmful emissions and build a more sustainable future. It was very difficult to get to that agreement, but we were able to do it. And I was part of the House delegation that went to Dubai, and I will tell you, it was a delegation of 15 or 16 House members. For the first time in history, there were 9 Republicans and 6 Democrats who went to COP. And the Republicans had been boycotting COP for about 20 years before they showed up in force last year. And I actually appeared on a panel at COP on nuclear regulation, which I'll talk about in a minute, with the chairman of the House Energy Subcommittee, Jeff Duncan, and we actually made a presentation together about legislation that we're working on. So I think as frustrating as these issues can be, there's a lot of hope. And a lot of the hope that I have came from what we were able to do in the last Congress with the House, the Senate, and the Biden administration in terms of real investments, the biggest investments in U.S. history in climate remediation. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, which became law, we had over $352 billion in private investment for clean energy manufacturing, electric vehicle supply chains, and solar manufacturing. We created more than 270,000 clean energy jobs, with millions more on the way. We expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 1 billion tons by 2030. This bill also awarded billions to help communities become more resilient and protect them from extreme weather event. And it also had grants for millions of Americans to help save on their electricity bills. An extraordinary effort, and one that I think has gone a little bit under the radar because the Inflation Reduction Act was just so large, and also because the benefits of that massive bill are only starting to come down to communities right now. And so at the same time, we did as much as we could without actually legislating climate goals. We still, and with the toxic environment of the current 118th Congress, still we are working to address these issues and work on really leaning in on climate. But as I said, that's not going to be enough, and we all know it. So I'm hoping, as I mentioned, to get my gavel back in the next Congress, because I'll be frank, I don't think this Speaker and this Congress, even if they could pull together 218 votes, which is a question every single day, I don't think that they have the will. I know for a fact they don't have the will to do it. And now that it's April, we're already into the election season, so the idea that Congress would pass meaningful climate legislation at this point, I don't think it's going to happen the rest of this year. But I'm continuing to work on legislation, and I want to talk to you for a minute about this bill that I did. In the last Congress, I wrote a bill called the Clean Energy Innovation and Deployment Act, or CEDA. What that bill is, it's a comprehensive bill that invests in clean energy technologies establishes a clean energy standard, incentivizes methane waste prevention, and lowers energy costs for low-income households. Most of you know that the scientists say we need to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050. That's the standard to avoid all of the catastrophe that could happen. My bill provides a way to get to 0% emissions by 2050. It's source neutral, so however people feel like they can get there, then that's acceptable under my bill. And the reason I wrote it that way is because if you think about our large nation, and you think about Colorado versus Arizona versus Washington State versus New York versus Florida, everybody has a different mix of energy that they use, and everybody has different ways that they could get to 0% emissions. And so what my bill does, it has an all-of-the-above approach to energy production, which includes solar, wind, nuclear, and traditional energy sources. Zero-emission electricity credits would encourage power companies to deploy innovative technologies that reduce emissions. And also, it encourages traditional energy producers to operate in a way that protects our environment and reduces carbon emissions. So when I worked on this bill, I actually worked really hard with everybody across the spectrum, and I was able to get Xcel Energy and the Sierra Club to endorse my bill. So I thought that was, I thought that was really hopeful. So then I went to one of my Republican friends who I've done a lot of work with on bipartisan legislation, mostly healthcare legislation. And I presented this bill and I said, look, the energy industry supports it, the environmentalists support it, what could be wrong? And he goes, so the goal is 0% by 2050? And I said, yeah. He goes, that just seems extreme. I said, well, not as extreme as the weather events we're going to see if we don't do it. And he goes, well, could we do 90% instead of 100%? I said, no. So here we are. I mean, you know, I'm bipartisan, but only to a point. So I'm continuing to work on it. And my pal John Curtis, who I mentioned, he's now running for the Senate. And he was a little sheepish when he came over to me and told me he was running for the Senate. And I said, why? I need a sponsor over there in the Senate. So fingers crossed in the next Congress. But I'm going to keep working on it. And I have a lot of friends on the committee and in the Congress who also are working very, very hard on getting to this goal. Last but not least, I just want to mention this nuclear issue that I've been working on, because I think it's a really important issue to think about. Certainly for most of my career, I really was focused on alternatives to fossil fuels as solar, wind, energy efficiency, carbon capture, things like that. But it quickly became apparent to almost everybody who works in this space that we cannot have a clean energy portfolio, get to 100% by 2050 if we don't have nuclear energy. And so I've really been looking much more at how we can have safe and clean nuclear energy. And so this is how I ended up developing legislation with Jeff Duncan, who's the chairman of the committee, as I mentioned. And what this bill does, and it's passed the House, it's over in that other body now, and they're thinking they might pass it, but we don't know. Anyway, so what this bill does is it updates and modernizes the way we regulate nuclear energy to make sure that the projects that we're regulating are safe. And also, the part of the bill I wrote was to hire skilled supervisors and workers so that people knew what they were doing. And I'm hoping that we can pass this legislation. But the other issue, we really need to figure out what to do about nuclear waste. And I've been talking about this for years. Some of you might remember when we were looking at the Yucca Mountain disposal site. And I actually have been to the Yucca Mountain disposal site. It's pretty remote out there in Nevada, but the political winds went both ways. First, the Republicans tried to expedite approval, then the Democrats shut it down, but the issue exists still. What do you do with nuclear waste? And so if we are really going to work on increasing our nuclear energy, even these smaller advanced modular reactors that we talk about, we're going to have a real discussion about what we do about nuclear waste. So anyway, that's my report from the front. We've got about a half an hour for questions, and I'm delighted to answer any questions that you have. And if your question is not about energy, I think it's probably okay. Yes, Clover's shaking her head. So we're going to have the questions by mic because and that's why I'm standing up here, not there, because we're having a video link so people at home can watch it. Yeah, we're live streaming. Thank you. This is what happens. I tend to overwhelm people with the information. Now your mic's not on. Yeah. Okay, it's on now. Okay.
Is it on? Yeah. Is it on? Oh,
yeah.
It is. Well, thank you, fellow choir member, for taking on this amazing process to try to help us get to zero emissions by 2050. We all know that there are a couple of countries involved in this process. Can you speak a little bit about what the Chinese are working on to get their emissions down?
Well, so of course, for some years, the bugaboo that we've had has been China, because China is still constructing coal-fired plants, and they're not just constructing coal-fired plants in China. They're constructing them in other parts of the world, like Africa. And so this is part of why we need an international coalition like COP28 to be able to help put international pressure on China. But at the same time, what we're beginning to see is China has their economy has as you probably know, China's economy has really taken a dive. And so we're beginning to see some glimmers that they're trying to move big time into renewable energy, in particularly solar and wind. And so we want to figure out a way to support that, but also realizing that we have our own economy and all of the economies of our free world allies that we have to worry about. Some of you might remember about 15 years ago when China, because it's a state-driven economy, they were investing all of their money into solar panels. Remember that? Remember Solyndra? And this was all in my committee too. And so what they were doing is they were manufacturing these solar panels at a very much reduced rate than we could either manufacture them here or in our allies, and then dumping them on the international market. And it was a real problem. Well, now what we've realized, and COVID helped us realize a lot of this, with the international supply chain issues that we had with China, we're working very, very hard with our allies around the world to build and strengthen supply chains that don't involve China. And that's also going to help us economically with all of these energy issues. Many of you know, I do a lot of work around, I'm the co-chair of the Japan Study Group in Congress, and I do a lot of work around policy with Japan. And I actually helped lead an energy trip to Japan last June, where we met with folks in the energy ministry there. Japan really has a problem because after the Fukushima Daiichi catastrophe with the tsunami, They only had one real source of energy, and that was nuclear. And because of the outcry, they shut down all their nuclear plants. They had to move to liquefied natural gas. And they've been trying to figure out, because climate impacts Japan very heavily because they're an island. So they've been trying to figure out how to get independent since then. And we had some very interesting meetings around partnerships that the U.S. and Japanese companies are having for innovative new development. So I think that's a good sign, and that's just one example of the international agreements that we're making both in Asia and around the world to try to develop an independent energy resource from China. And at that point, China's going to really have to lean in to develop renewable energy. Yeah, Pete.
Diana, thanks for coming. And thank you for your wonderful work. I'd like to ask you about public trust. And obviously, public trust in Diana DeGette in this group and the whole congressional district is huge. Public trust in Congress is not. And the other two branches of the government have approval ratings in the 40 to 50% range. Congress's trust ranges between 9 and 13%. And this isn't anything you've caused. I want to ask you more about what you can do, what we can do to improve that. I think the public sentiment is one of pretty deep anxiety that who can we trust to run the nation? And I'll say one more thing. It's pretty clear to us that the folks in the party that many of us would call the other people have some folks who are deeply radical and disrespectful and more more fans of pushing and yelling than the people whom we know. So it's a question for you. Is there anything you could do and anything we could do to help you do it?
Yeah.
That would give the American people some confidence that, yeah, we like the people who are running the government. Thanks, Diana.
Well, thank you, Pete. So historically, I must say, before I went to Congress, I was a trial lawyer. So I think that the public trust in trial lawyers was about like 25%. And when I got to Congress was at like 26% or something. So anyway, I specialize in low confidence jobs. But seriously, what I think is, I know public trust in Congress is very low. One thing that really upsets me, and this is not personally directed at you, is, you see this all the time you see this in the news media where they say Congress is broken. And I say, well, I'm a Democrat. We're not broken. And people say to me, how can you stand it? I'm like, you know what? I'm a member of the party, and we have a very broad spectrum in the Democratic Party. We have people from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Cori Bush, all the way to Henry Cuellar from Texas and everything in between. And yet, in the last Congress, we were able to pass unbelievable legislation, working with a Senate that was, remember this, 50-50. Kamala Harris had to go down there all the time to break the votes over in the Senate, and with the White House. We passed the Build Back Better bill. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act. We passed the CHIPS Act to encourage the supply chain issues. And we passed, and we got us out of the pandemic. And we did that with numbers that are pretty much exactly like the numbers that are in Congress right now. We had about a 3 or 4 vote majority. And we did that because everybody in our caucus had a common commitment to the future of our country and to preserving our democracy. And I don't say this as a criticism of all Republicans, because this is what has happened, in my opinion, to the Republican Party, is they have been hijacked by a very small number of people, the MAGA, the Freedom Caucus, the MAGA people. They don't really believe in a federal government. And I don't say, that's not hyperbole. I don't say that lightly. Most of those people do not believe we should have a federal government. And so what's happened is they only have a majority. Well, it depends on the week. Next week, they're only going to have a one-vote majority in the House. Last week, because of absences, there was one day where we actually had more people than they did. Unfortunately, the rules were such that day that we couldn't consider meaningful bills, so we're like, well, okay. But there may be a bill, but there may be a day before the end of this Congress where Hakeem Jeffries is Speaker, at least for a short period of time, and we have some ideas of what we might do on that day or two. But and I'm working with him on that. So, so what has happened? So I mean, most of it's like I said, if we can bring that Ukraine, Israel, Asia aid bill to the floor this week, I'll bet that it'll get 300 votes out of 435. I bet you it'll get 300, maybe more votes. Most of the Republicans are like me. They care about the future of our democracy. They care about policy. They care about doing the right thing. They might have a different take on it than I do, but they essentially are in politics for the right reason. It's this small group of people, and you know who they are, and they don't care. They don't care if they tear down the institution, because that's not why they're there. So I wish people would stop saying Congress is broken, because I don't think Congress is broken, and I apologize to the pastors in advance for saying this. I don't mean to be partisan, but I think the Republican Party is broken. And I tell my people all the time, my friends all the time, you guys need to take back your party, because it's better for America if you have two functioning political parties. And I'm hoping after this election in November, that's exactly what will happen, is that we'll have two functioning political parties, and then we can have those robust debates on the policy issues, not on crazy MAGA, stuff. So that's the first thing. But the second thing I will say that disturbs me is that the reward system in politics now has been completely shifted. And that's because of media and social media in particular. I see this all the time. Like I did a bill, most of you know about this bill because I've talked about it so much, is my 21st Century Cures bill that I did in 2016, which was this massive healthcare bill that restructured the way we do biomedical research at the NIH and then drug and device approval at the FDA. And it was, again, with Fred Upton, a Republican from Michigan. And this bill gave us the authorities, so the FDA was able to approve the COVID vaccine through the expedited approval. So it's like really a big bill. Fred and I couldn't get anybody to cover it. Finally, I said, Fred, I think we should go down to the floor and have a big public fight, calling names, and then we should go on social media and we should attack each other. And then it'd be like, you could see the press, massive bill in jeopardy. And then we could go down on the floor and have a great big public, makeup session, and then it'd be like, bill saved at the last minute, then we'd get press. And I find that to be horrifying. And as you say, the reward system, particularly for junior members, is really the people with the craziest things to say on both sides of the aisle. And the loudest voices are the ones that get the attention. People like me who are just workman legislators trying to improve the system, we don't get that attention. And you know, I've got to say thank you to all of you, and thank you to my constituents in the 1st Congressional District. I don't really know how they know what I do, because it's difficult for me to get the press to cover it. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, you can sign up for seriously, we do a newsletter every Friday, Thursday or Friday when we're in session. It's 1 page, and then it has links where you can go deeper if you want to. It's the only way I know to tell my constituents, A, what's really going on in Washington, and B, what I'm doing. You should sign up for it. Yes?
Hi. First off, as a biomedical researcher myself, I want to say thank you so much for your support of the NIH and of biomedical research in general. I truly appreciate it. My question has to do with artificial intelligence, AI, and sort of cloud storage and other sort of cloud computing. And you know, as you know, the data centers that run these sort of functions are enormous and take enormous amounts of energy. And I know that there have been problems in terms of the incredible energy usage that come from these centers. And so I was just wondering, you know, from the perspective of Congress, is this an issue that you foresee growing in magnitude? And is there an approach to take to perhaps make these functions of our life, which I think are going to stick around, like artificial intelligence, be more sustainable?
Yes, so believe it or not, I actually, in the last Congress, I was the chair of the Oversight Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce. I actually had a hearing on this issue. And Bitcoin and AI have massive amounts of energy use. And I didn't really know that. This is why I love being in Congress. You learn new things every day. And we had a huge hearing on it, and it really is an issue. And it's one of the issues that, I mean, AI can have tremendous prospects in biomedical research, in everything, but we have to make sure that the unintended consequences are not great. And this is one thing we are continuing. We have, you'll be happy to know, we have members of Congress who are very knowledgeable in this, and who we have task forces, and we are working quite hard on, number one, how do we regulate AI so that it's used for good, not evil, but also the collateral issues like energy usage. I always tell people, remember, I'm in the body where people were talking about the internet as a series of tubes. So thank goodness we do have people, Ted Lieu from California and others. And I'm pretty well educated on it too, but I'm not an expert. Yeah.
Hi, Jim. Diana, I could not overstate my admiration for your resilience, and want to thank you for it. I want you to stay in the healthcare space for a little longer. You mentioned earlier about how in working on energy, how important it was for the private sector and the market to work with standards set by the government. Shift that thinking over toward healthcare, which is, some people say the healthcare system is broken, but it's actually humming along beautifully as this unbelievable economic engine producing wealth all over the place for a few, but performing very poorly in producing health. What you're thinking about how we're going to manage to harness this runaway wealthcare system and get it redirected to being a healthcare system where people can actually get access and it can be affordable.
So we, when we passed the Affordable Care Act, it did an enormous job of bringing millions and millions more Americans into the healthcare system and improving their health. What we've seen since then, as you allude to, is we've seen problems in a couple of places. Number one, people's out-of-pocket costs are increasing. Their deductibles have increased, and also we're seeing a disturbing number now of these insurance policies that don't really give people much coverage. Secondly, the cost of prescription drugs has really skyrocketed. And in the next hour I come to talk to this group, I can talk to you about my analysis of what's happened in the whole prescription drug place. So what I think is, and by the way, in the next Congress, I will be either the ranking member or hopefully the chair of the Health Subcommittee in Energy and Commerce, and it's my intention to do some really deep dives into healthcare accessibility, focusing on pharmaceutical availability and also on the cost of healthcare and how can we bend the curve. There's a lot of solutions that have been proposed by people, but this current leadership in the House is not going to take any of that up. The last thing I'll mention, and I've been talking to a lot of folks, including the new NIH director, Monica Bertagnolli, who's fabulous, and Rob Califf over at the FDA also, about biomedical research and what we can do to encourage biomedical research, but also to make sure when we have these cures that the cures are accessible to everybody, not just people with a lot of money. Let me just take a moment for a commercial interruption to say I actually passed 3 bills last month through the House. Again, you see a theme developing here, and if you can believe it, the least productive Congress in 100 years at least, but I passed 3 bills through the House. One bill was a bill that I did with Congressman Mike Burgess from Texas, a conservative Republican, which it's called the Prevention Act, and what it does, it's kind of in the weeds, but it's going to make a big difference. It changes the way the Congressional Budget Office gives a estimate of how much a bill's going to cost, so that it focuses on prevention rather just on the cost of treating the disease. And if we can get this through the Senate, this is going to be massive for encouraging prevention, and I think that's really going to help. Second bill that I passed was a bill to continue getting research through the state health departments in an organized way on maternal mortality rates. Because even now today, as you probably know, maternal mortality for Black women in particular, irrespective of socioeconomic background, is 3 times what it is for everybody else, but we don't have the data to know why. And what's the third bill? See, now, but then we also had a hearing on a bill that I'm doing with another Republican, Larry Bouchon from Indiana. And what this bill does is called the VALID Act. It regulates lab-based testing. Did you know that, if you're pregnant and you go to get a test to see if there's fetal abnormalities, there's no regulation of those tests. Isn't that unbelievable? And so this is one of the top priorities of the FDA too. And we had a hearing on that bill last month. We're hoping we can get it marked up and passed through the House this spring, and then again onto the Senate. So, I'm over here legislating a lot on healthcare issues and energy issues. Yeah.
Diana, thanks for coming. That's the best commercial message I've heard in a long time. So thank you for that. Because this is a religious institution, I wanted to ask you a religious question, okay? And the question is a tough one because it relates to what's going on in the Middle East right now. It seems to me that if we could bring the Islamic population and the Jewish population together on some rational policy for what goes on there, that would play a big role in influencing the local parties there to do something different. So the question is there any hope for getting the Islamic population and the Jewish population together in a way that might influence what's going on in the Middle East? Thank you.
Again, I don't have another hour, but let me take a quick little stab. So I don't know how many of you have been to Israel. I've been twice, and the second time I went to Israel, I was actually in those villages down by Gaza, which were attacked by Hamas, and saw their situation, met some of the people who later lost their lives, and the reason I bring that up is because in that region, the Palestinians and the Israelis lived together in harmony for many, many years, and they worked agriculture together down there. And for much of Israel, the Palestinians are law-abiding citizens, and as are the Israelis. But of course, we have the militants of Hamas and others in the region, and I have thought from day one that the ultimate solution here has got to be a two-state solution. I believe quite strongly that Israel is the homeland of the Jews, and it was established that way, and the Jews deserve to have a homeland. But I also believe that the Palestinians have the right to self-determination and to equality. And what you have right now in Israel is you have an unequal system and of government, not of religion. And also, if you've been there, you see all the religions are layered on top of each other. Islam, Judaism, Christianity are all right there in that tiny little space. And so I think one thing, and I also saw and you saw yesterday some of the settlers on the West Bank were attacking some of the Palestinian cities. And so the level of discord has just increased, but I think that if you got a new Israeli government, frankly, and you were able to have strong leadership on the Palestinian side, that the thing to do, and with help from the U.S. and some of our allies in that region, the ultimate solution would be a two-state solution governmentally. That would really help decrease the violence, and it would help with the religious issues. That's my nutshell answer. Last question.
Thanks, Diana, for your service. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take us down to a more plebeian type of thing. Yesterday, I got to experience something that was kind of cool. I got to get an electric lawnmower because Suncor had done bad things, and they were required to put some money toward giving out free lawnmowers, so long as you got rid of your gas one. Is that something that Congress gets involved with in sort of saying, if people are getting fined, they have to do some good things for the environment? Because as an individual, it seems hard to figure out what I can do all the time, and this helped.
Well, yes, when the agencies find Suncor, they can direct them to put money towards a pool for things. We can also give incentives, and this is what we've done with electric vehicles, right? Is we've given tax incentives for electric vehicles, and also under the Inflation Reduction Act, we're now building charging stations all throughout the country so people can charge their electric vehicles. So there are some policy things we can do. We can direct, and this is what these bills next week that they were going to do were directed at. The EPA is trying to do new standards for appliances so that they would start to move to more energy efficiency, and in particular, Donald Trump does not like this. So I can go on about that, but there can be incentives given and directives given. But to your question about what can individuals do, I've been saying this for years. People shouldn't sit around and go, when's Congress going to do something? Congress needs to do something. Every level of government needs to do something. But if everybody started thinking in their own lives how they could impact climate, then it would make a huge, huge dent. The number one low-hanging fruit on climate is energy efficiency and conservation. So make sure that your house is insulated. I mean, this sounds like a PSA, I know, but make sure your home is insulated. When you run errands, make sure you consolidate them, that you're not driving here and there. If you can have an EV, or if you can walk or have a bike, do it. All those things do make a difference over time. And I think people recognize that and are beginning to recognize it more and more. I've been, some of my colleagues, I was just on a congressional trip, and I was talking to some of my colleagues from agricultural areas, and they were telling me about some of the innovation they're doing in agriculture to save energy. So if everybody works on it, then it really does begin to lift us up. And I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for being here at Montview. I love it here. Thanks.
Anyway, I wanted to just put in a plug for what I love, which is water aerobics up at the pool